This buddy off. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to our weekly podcast. My name is Patrick Tan. With me, as usual, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist, Jonathan Ryder. I think we didn't take a break last week. We actually filmed an early episode last Monday, and that's because I had to travel. But we've got some interesting topics. I'm excited to dig into with John. Obviously, he's got all the information. I'm just here for the face. But we're gonna talk about uranium finance hack and final arrest. Finally, let's talk about that. The drift protocol. Bet you haven't heard that one for a long time. Drift protocol is like, ooh, it's like a throwback Monday. And then next we'll talk about Zach XBT, who is from Twitter tracing fame, and he talks a little bit about the blacklisting race, like why the racing to blacklist addresses and why this seems to be an effort in futility. And then finally, we're going to talk about the KuCoins. We'll talk about KuCoin as a bit of bonus content right at the end. But let's just jump straight into the uranium finance stuff. This is an oldie but a goodie, I guess.
Well,
Let's
yeah,
go
okay.
back.
So all three of these things are sort of connected, right? So
Correct.
what we're going to go through here is a hack, such as it is, that's basically about incompetence by the developers. In this case, like a constant was changed, zeros were added in one place but not another, and somebody drained a bunch of the money. We'll go through that one in a second. But the root cause of the problem there was just, stupidity, incompetence, mistakes. Stuff was done wrong, and then somebody took advantage of those mistakes, sucked the money out. Fine.
That seems to
Um,
be the standard plot for all of these
you know,
shows.
well, but it's very basic, right? So was this a bug or was this a feature? Given that it's just, a few characters that were wrong, whatever. And
Again,
the guy,
very consistent with the plot line for most of these stories.
the drift one is a lot more complicated and isn't completely settled yet, but
Yeah.
process a whole bunch of stuff happened there, and there are mistakes, but it seems like that was more a case of people competently doing what they thought they were supposed to be doing, and at a higher level, the industry's approach is just, not that reliable. So, you know, okay, that's like, you put what you're supposed to drive with your hands 10 and 2, and then
10 and 2.
airbag, or and like, that you're doing that and there's still a problem. That's a
Yeah,
little bit different. You're following kind of the instructions, right?
correct.
And then, there was some circle seizures of some funds 2 weeks ago, and it's been evolving for about a week and a half, and complaints about arbitrary seizures and the process not being very right, and that actually came out around the same time as a preprint of a paper, me and some other people, sort of
The
demonstrating.
compliance impossibility paper.
Well, no, this is the blacklisting race, sort of
Oh,
the
yes, yes. That the one that you
but
did with the
yeah,
professor from that university.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, the same Ben and Mike, and then a Korean new collaborator, actually, Korean guy. So
South
grad
Korean, I
student.
might add.
Yeah, yes. He actually just finished his military service and is a grad student, so there's no, yeah. Yeah, so that's more of a sort of theoretical explanation for why people will always escape with the money, and actually how these things don't really work at all. So it's a nice progression here, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So uranium finance is a thing that was hacked. I think it's 2021.
Mm-hmm.
It's a fork of Uniswap, and then they changed the scaling and the sizes for some things, and they did not change those constants consistently everywhere, and that left open a vector for people to suck all the money out,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody sucked all the money out. Um, okay, it is extremely unlikely they intended to change. It was something like changing 100 to 10,000, or changing
Mm,
1,000
mm,
to
mm.
100,000, whatever. It's unlikely that they intended to change that inconsistently in different places, right? Unlikely that
Yes,
this was done
unlikely.
as an attempt to introduce a very weird backdoor and then steal all the money yourself later. But frankly, it's not possible.
Not
And
impossible.
given the simplicity of the changes, at some point, and it's probably a legal standard for this, right? At some point, you've got to say you took a contract that was negotiated very carefully,
Yeah,
you made four very simple changes to it. If you're going to tell me that one of those four was wrong, kind of don't care. We're enforcing it as written, right? I mean, at some point, that has
yeah,
to be taken as the same way that the longer and more carefully negotiated the contract is, the more seriously the terms are taken. Whereas if it's all boilerplate, maybe there's more, right? So yes. Anyway, this got hacked. A whole bunch of money got drained, and somebody got arrested for doing this. It was not laundered well, which is to say, it took them 5 years to catch them. But actually, the procedures that were used don't seem to have been very. They weren't effective. They found somebody. Um, and we're not so much commenting on the competence of the laundering here as the simplicity of the problem, right? So
correct.
this is we've seen cases where something is copied, forked, cloned, and the thing had a problem in the first place. And
Yeah.
3 years later, one version hadn't been upgraded, the other people had migrated, and it got attacked.
Yeah.
In some sense, that's kind of nobody's fault. I mean,
Yeah.
that's, or at best, it's the user's fault because the user should have not left their money in a thing that was, known for a long time to not be okay. Here, they took a thing that's fine. They incorrectly, it seems, made a small change to it. That's clearly just the fault of because if you said it's a Uniswap fork, people will assume it's fine, whether they should verify it or not, or how much is their shared responsibility. And you made minuscule changes that turn out to introduce a massive attack vector. That's kind of on the people who did that. Now, I'm not saying this guy shouldn't get in trouble for exploiting it, but at the same time, you do have to. This establishes a line for what's a bug and what's a feature, I guess, right? I don't know. That's
I
it.
mean, I mean, like to put this in terms that I think people understand. Let's say now you're the manager of a Tiffany store and you left the front door unlocked and you left all the cabinets and all the jewelry in place and somebody waltzed in and they helped themselves to it. They're still guilty of a crime.
We talked about something, was it last week, a couple of weeks
Yeah.
ago, where
Yeah.
they,
Yeah.
there
Last week.
were no validation checks on certain versions of the submissions. So, like, on some level, if that issue is simple enough,
Yeah.
if you took a protocol, cloned it, added a multi-order feature, but only added some of the checks, not all of the, like, is that what you intended to do or not, right? This does genuinely become unclear, and the guy might have a defense to, I didn't think this was a hack. I thought it was supposed to work this way. They only changed five
Yeah.
lines.
Yeah.
I thought that was the point. I don't. I'm not saying that the defense
That
will
that
work. But
I think that's fair because that hasn't really been tested in court yet. We don't know.
yeah,
But we're
some
gonna find out
point,
at some point.
at some point, a simple enough change that's narrow and discreet and whatever should maybe be
I mean,
responsive. Now,
in the defense of the people who, and I don't want to use the word exploit, but the people who use these systems as they're designed, and as they're presented, if you run a store where you go in and you say you can help yourself to, if you put $1 in and you can take $10 worth of stuff, well,
yes, yeah.
well, golly
Restaurants that
gee,
say pay what you like weren't robbed if you don't really pay a meaningful amount of money. Now I'm
bottomless
not
shrimp,
encouraging. I'm not
bottomless shrimp.
encouraging people to do this, right? But yeah, to some extent that cuts a little bit both ways. Now the drift one is a
Okay.
good sort of next step here in that, and this is based on somewhat longer narratives have come out from them and from related parties about
Yeah.
what happened. This thing was exploited, whatever, for $280 million, $230 million, whatever. And there's a couple of sort of interesting sidelights there. They claim that some group was talking to them for a long time about integrating with them, and that it seems that group either was a front for some hackers or
Hmm.
was it's infiltrated by hackers. Maybe we'll eventually get some kind of answer as to whether they were a front or infiltrated or whatever. And who knows? Fine. They clearly gave these people a little bit of trust, and that trust was used by someone, either that group or the people who were fronting behind them, whatever, to take over some not well managed multi-sigs and take the money. Fair enough. Okay. As is often the case here when there's a hack of something relatively large, this is a relatively large Solana, was a relatively large Solana, whatever.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
The uh, certain saw protocols that call themselves non-custodial and permissionless will all of a sudden blacklist things and discover they can stop trading with certain whatever
I've always
chains.
found that fascinating. It's always
So,
decentralized. We're not in control. We're not in charge until something bad happens. And suddenly, oh, we're able to do all these things to prevent this sort of stuff from happening.
so that's
Fascinating.
interesting. Now, this one also has the converse of that.
Yeah.
Somebody found that there were some flows connecting between the attack and Backpack, which is an exchange that does KYC. And Backpack's response was that I'm going to read this exact thing here. So their response was that it's not actually that the attacker was using their system. It was used by a quote cross-chain intents solver, which is a fancy way of saying a no KYC trading service.
Hmm.
So if you run a KYC trading service and you allow people who are no KYC trading services to transact programmatically on your exchange, you're now running a no KYC trading service.
That's pretty much how that works.
So their defense to, no, we don't know who the hacker is because they didn't actually KYC. We just accepted an OTC desk that trades with anonymous people, so don't blame us, does seem like an admission that what they were doing can't possibly be consistent with the conditions of their license. But
It is a little bit of a stretch of the
yeah.
license, the confines of the license. But I mean, again, because then
Well,
you can
a
it
little
goes
bit
to
of a stretch.
layering. Yeah,
I
it
mean,
goes to layering, right? How many layers do you
there's,
have to go?
well, but in this case, their customer was a thing, an entity, or whatever, that openly says it'll trade with anybody with no documents.
Yeah, generally that's not okay.
You're not allowed to onboard that guy, right?
Yeah. Well,
Right.
yeah, I mean, if you have a license, that's a strange person that you would want to onboard.
Now, in principle, if that person had a license somewhere and somehow that was consistent with their license requirements, then it
An
could
argument could be made.
may or may
Yeah.
not be okay. But of course, they didn't, right? And they
It's
call it
hard to see how they would.
an on-chain intense solver. What that means is it's a thing that was looking for prices in different chains and anonymously bridging as necessary across them to achieve the trading results, right? So that's, yeah. So I thought that was kind of entertaining.
It is.
Yeah. And then you
As
had
many of these
crypto.
things are.
There were some smaller protocols and tokens and whatnot that just froze funds without any kind of legal process based on this kind of stuff. And this will connect to the Zach XBT and related
Yes, let's talk
comics.
about the Zag XBT one. Yeah.
We're going to have to set up the when we get to the moment. When you have an ecosystem in which people are defending what they're doing as virtuous by saying, we absolutely KYC to this no KYC trading service. Like, all right, so how seriously are we really supposed to take efforts within such an ecosystem to try to identify problems? And you've got people freezing tokens with no legal process who
Hmm.
are the same people who think it's fine to trade with someone as long as the cross-chain intent solver tells you who they are and gives you their contract addresses. And that's just the cognitive dissonance there is just unbelievable. So in the Zach XBT case, this is a related blacklisting. There's some fraud case, doesn't really matter. A whole bunch of addresses got frozen by Circle because a court issued an order to freeze these addresses, temporary freeze, and Circle requires a court order and somewhat blindly follows court orders, but doesn't do anything without a court order. And
It's consistent.
a number of these were different services. And these are services that were known that, the address is associated with a website that is a gaming business or whatever, and they're licensed or whatever, and they're separate businesses. So if it turns out they're all the same person, that's really breaking news, right? They're not related. They're just third parties involved
Yeah.
in some scam,
Yeah.
downstream of some scam. And there
Correct.
were complaints that, how can you freeze all these user commingled funds without, okay, right? And then some stuff got unfrozen and not. So you can see how a judge, that's a
Yeah.
process, right? And sometimes might say, we don't know who it is, stop everything, we'll sift through it, we'll allow funds back, we'll do partial freezes, we'll whatever. That's a system. An alternative system is people who think because it's a cross-chain intent solver, that it's perfectly fine to use and those are not things that sort of fit together. And there are procedures, and a lot of the crypto tracing, whatever, security folks were up in arms about the Circle behaviors, don't like Circle in general for its dependence on legal process. We're not defending a sort of slavish generate a court order, we'll follow it blindly. Don't generate a court order, we'll tell you to pound sand. That's a crazy set of policies because black and white is not the right way to have policies, right? You got to have at least a little bit of a conversation. Yeah, but the falling back on people who think cross-chain intent solvers are perfectly fine, KYC counterparties, and just eliminates all your liability. Like that's just lunacy, right? Their proposals are crazy. And the simplest explanation I think now that I have for why their proposals are crazy, this paper we've been working
Mm.
on how to frame this
Yeah.
for quite a while. We've got a very simple framework that shows how you've got finite bandwidth on every blockchain, on every
Hmm.
consensus-based system, because there's some bandwidth. And as a result of that finite bandwidth, and basically because the hacker knows when the hack is going to happen before the investigators can find it, right? And we can drill down on that in a second, but the criminal knows when they broke into your house, right? The thief knows when the robbery is going to happen
It's a
before.
bit like if you recall the Bybit hack, if you remember like
Yeah,
the
yeah. There
Bybit
was a
hackers
time when they
actually.
couldn't find, and then
Yeah, and they actually had preceded a whole bunch of
yeah,
uh gassed up
yeah,
wallets that were
yeah.
clearly provided by some kind of service provider, which was more or
Well,
less untraceable.
so that's exactly in our model. So you've got some delta, some time window between when the hack occurs and when the hack is discovered.
Yeah.
And you can use that to spread your funds out. And the
Yeah.
simple version of this is to just spread your funds along enough models that the blacklisting bandwidth of the network does not allow them to block all of your money, because you pre-seed a bunch of things, you get ready, you disperse it quickly, and then you just can't capture all of it. You'll capture some fraction of
You'll
it.
catch some of it.
But as the time gap increases and as the blacklisting bandwidth drops, you catch less and less and less.
Correct.
Right. Um, we're showing, and the paper actually works through, I think it's the Ronin bridge hack, where you can
Hmm.
see clearly rolling waves of blacklisting and the funds being dispersed on a wave pushing out through a graph. It's just harder and harder to capture the money. So the circle being a bit overbroad and saying we're going to take the whole balance and sort it out later, I'm not defending that outright. I'm saying part of the reason you might do such a thing is that the alternative is to just always lose.
Yeah.
And the judge may have emerged from a multi-hundred-year legal tradition in which they understand that you'll always lose.
Yeah.
Similarly, a bunch of crypto people saying, we've found who it is, take all of their money now, we're sure we're right. We already know that's not how it works, because the time delta tells you these people don't always know everything, right?
Correct.
Because you know there was a crime until this period after the crime occurred. Well, that means your view of the world was manifestly wrong for at least this period of time, but at least these facts. Why should we believe that you have all of the information at this time, right? Because it will mean, if you're quicker, people could, instead of just dispersing their funds, try to set other people up, have the funds in a commingled thing. You know, the judge may have freezed some gaming sites of whatever sizes that may or may not have been known to the court but if the addresses were, Binance hot wallets, Circle says in their terms they'll resist commingled, MakerDAO large commingled things, vaults, sorry, MakerDAO vaults, Binance hot wallets, whatever. So, you're not gonna there's different ways to approach this. All of that Thorchain stuff, right? Thorchain would have at least resisted for long enough to have the money escape. So, right, what's really
We're about to
and
find out.
I don't think that their complaints are reasonable in that their proposal is to defer to their expertise absolutely in cases
That
where
makes
repeatedly they're
unless you're
yeah, you
precog from
just
Minority Report. No.
well, and in practice they just don't know, right? I mean, I've been saying for quite a while, a lot of this is pretty dumb because you can just escape with the money if you plan in advance. And we now have an extremely simple model of that escaping that fits the reality of how people escape.
And they get away with
And
it.
none of these proposals catches any of that.
No.
Right.
But
And, I'm not Circle being very, very heavy-handed about fund freezes. Their concern is ending up looking like regular old banking. And I think maybe we're discovering that,
regular old banking works.
problems are inevitable, right? That those consequences are not technology problems, as people have been saying for many, many years. You're solving problems with technology that are not technology problems, so your solution won't work.
Yeah. And on that note, final bit of bonus content. KuCoin had a $500,000 settlement with the CFTC. What's that about?
Yeah, okay. So KuCoin paid a very large settlement. It's $300 million, something like that, with the
Something like that.
DOJ
Yeah, with the
60
DOJ some time ago. Yeah.
some large thing. And that was about all kinds of behavior that was not okay. This is a CFTC settlement. And when this first came out, when the CFTC first announced they were pursuing charges or whatever in negotiations with KuCoin over this thing, I think it was the then chairwoman Pham made some statements about how she didn't really understand these charges. This related to providing leveraged
Leverage
margin
fund.
trade.
Yeah. Correct.
And her comment basically boiled down to, if the tokens have leverage inside, that's like an ETF with leverage inside.
Mm-hmm.
It's not leverage trading in the existing framework.
Correct.
They're not identical, right? There's a little bit of a difference if the token is programmatically leveraged, and whatever. Whereas as a guy inside a bank running a computer, they can stop. Fine. But yeah, no, I mean, she's the point that every company that has any outstanding debt, their equity is itself a levered instrument. And we do not require people to register as leverage trading platforms if they let people buy stocks in. Almost all companies have, well, it's probably true that every listed company in the United States has at least some accounts payable, which means they have leverage to some extent over their working capital, right? And almost all of them will have, bonds outstanding, proper revolving lines of credit, actually be leveraged. So yeah, we don't count that as leverage. She wasn't wrong.
No,
Uh, my read on the $500,000 settlement is that they don't want to admit that there was no case here, but the $500,000 compared to the 300 million they paid recently
it's
is
to say
obviously
that
meaningless.
we it's not that we don't have a case,
Yeah.
but maybe we don't really have a great one.
The exchange is willing to say, yeah, we won't do this crime again, so we're good, thanks. I'm not really sure. I hope there's no proper precedent on that, and it would be nice because I had a lot of issues with fans view on a lot of things, but she was not wrong
Hmm.
that products that embed leverage are generally not because there's no active margining by the
Correct.
end user,
Yeah.
right? And those are generally not
And it's
regulated.
it's not like the margin requirements and stuff like that where the users are meant to talk. It just doesn't work at all in the same mechanics.
And if you're going to have some kind of, if the answer is, well, the leverage is only trivial versus, okay, well, then if I
Hmm.
own shares in a business and there's a management takeover and they decide to lever the business up, do I all of a sudden have to get, licensed as my platform? I mean, being
I know,
serious, like
I know, I
if
know,
a company
and that's a good
decides to
point.
take on a bunch of debt and do it, like if your
Then,
leverage is above 5 to 1, that's
well,
crazy.
technically speaking, that every single leverage buyout, every single private equity,
Well, I mean, those mostly delist the companies, but you're right that financially, if management does that and doesn't delist the company, that's why I didn't have an example because I can't think
yeah,
of one
I can't
in
think of one.
recent past with a company very, very discreetly while staying listed.
Yeah,
But look, Apple and Microsoft went from having zero debt to having debt
yeah,
in the last 20 years. It was a big deal when Microsoft first paid dividends, issued bonds. Apple issued these bonds to pay more dividends, whatever. And Apple having zero debt, again, I assume they have accounts payable, but no, zero debt. Um, so for those who aren't into whatever accounts payable means everyone has, like, you owe the phone company money, right? But you
yeah,
haven't paid them because you pay them monthly. For
correct.
companies, that's recorded as the outstanding bill payments
Yeah,
usually. When Apple and Microsoft first issued bonds, they went from having effectively no leverage because accounts payable is, leverage. To yeah, we borrowed billions of dollars and we now owe money. That's a thing, right? Did that make them leveraged? They're not highly leveraged.
no, yeah.
Highly, LBOs are also, but they're leveraged. Does that make them all of a sudden need to do some other filings? I mean, they got to be honest about the leverage, but yeah. So I actually kind of hoped that the resolution here would be a dismissal on the basis that the CFTC was just wrong, because
You know
the
that
court issue part of it's this
correct.
crazy thing. Yeah,
That
they just seem to,
it seems unlikely.
because
But
it's not like the government didn't get their pound of flesh out of KuCoin, which did a whole bunch of things wrong, which it admitted, and nobody's defending KuCoin's bad behavior. Uh,
that's a
the
different that was on a different topic. On different issues that are more DOJ as opposed to CFTC. You know, but I
Yeah, I do
understand.
worry then that if they start going after people for this, and it's just a totally arbitrary thing because you go after every broker and stock exchange for not, you know, which
I
is
I'd be surprised.
they're not going to do that,
Yeah,
right? But then it means in that case they really would unfairly be selectively going after crypto platforms
yeah.
if they.
No,
I
I
mean, to
agree.
some extent, this is unfair and selective. So,
Yeah. And on that note, thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being fans of the podcast. We appreciate all the likes, comments, and subscribes. Helps us get our content out there. We'll see you again next week. Thank you. Oh, happy Easter.